32,000 properties, listed for short-term tourist lets across Ireland. And in 18 days, the law that was supposed to deal with that number was quietly set aside, without a press release, without a statement, without a single minister standing at a podium to explain what happened. The 20th of May, 2026 was supposed to be a turning point for Irish renters. A national short-term letting register, years in the making, promised across multiple governments, announced as part of the Housing for All plan, was due to come into force. Every Airbnb-style property in the country would finally have to register with Fáilte Ireland. 10,000 homes were going to be pulled back from the tourist market and returned to the people who actually need somewhere to live. But 3 senior government sources have now told the Irish Times that the deadline will be missed. The legislation has not passed all stages in the Oireachtas. 2 government departments cannot agree on the final text, and the 20th of May will arrive and then pass, and the 32,000 properties will still be exactly where they are. Before we go further, quick one. Drop the city or county you are watching from into the comments, and tell me whether you're on a short break or settling in. I am genuinely curious where this channel lands, because this story is going to look very different depending on whether you are renting in Galway right now or watching from London, wondering why you cannot afford to come home. Because here is the thing nobody is saying loudly enough. The by-elections in Dublin Central and Galway West are on the 22nd of May. The register was due on the 20th, 2 days apart. The housing fix that was supposed to arrive before polling day will not arrive. And the question of whether anyone will be held to account for that is at this point genuinely open. That is the story. 3 open questions drive it. First, why does a register that has been promised since 2021 still have no legal basis in 2026? Second, what exactly is the mechanism that has kept 32,000 properties off the long-term rental market for 7 years in a country where there are fewer than 1,800 homes available to rent? And third, who benefits from the delay, and who is supposed to benefit from the law? The self-catering industry made its position clear this week. The Irish Self-Catering Federation wrote to government asking for the register to be pushed back to September at the earliest. The argument? The tourism season is already difficult because of the Iran war and associated cancellations. Operators cannot be expected to deal with a planning compliance burden on top of that. That is not an unreasonable concern in isolation. Rural communities in Kerry, Clare and Galway depend heavily on short-term letting income. Ministers Michael Healy-Rae and Norma Foley from County Kerry had already made their objections known before this week. The Oireachtas Committee Chair, Fianna Fáil TD James O'Connor, said that rural communities had been left, and this is a direct quote, in limbo. And look, that is a legitimate tension. The register was always going to create disruption for some parts of the tourism economy. Nobody is pretending otherwise. But here is the number that sits on the other side of that legitimate tension. Fewer than 1,800 homes available to rent across the entire country. Not in Dublin, not in Cork, across Ireland. On the 1st of February 2026, that was the total. That was the lowest February figure ever recorded by daft.ie. Not just low for this year, the lowest on record. And the register, the one that just got delayed again, was the mechanism that was supposed to add 10,000 properties back to that number. That was the surface. Now let us look at what is underneath. The Department of Housing and the Department of Enterprise have been negotiating over this legislation for months. According to the Irish Times, the Department of Enterprise believes there is, again, a direct quote, much more work to do before the original proposal can be implemented. There are 2 separate pieces of law that need to pass: a national planning statement from the Department of Housing and a short-term letting and tourism bill from the Department of Enterprise. Neither is ready. This matters because the architecture of the register depends on both. You cannot force properties off Airbnb without the planning rules in place to define which properties are compliant and which are not. And you cannot enforce those planning rules without the registration system to expose who is operating without permission. The 2 pieces need each other, and neither exists. Here is what an actual civil servant looking at this file would see. This is not a drafting accident. Planning permission for short-term lets in rent pressure zones has been required by law since 2019. That is 7 years ago. In those 7 years, exactly 401 applications for change of use planning permission were submitted by short-term let operators nationwide. 188 were granted, against a market of 32,000 properties. That means the overwhelming majority of short-term lets in Ireland have been operating without the required planning permission, and have been doing so without enforcement since the first Taoiseach who promised to fix this was still in office. Which is technically legal, which is technically the problem. If this breakdown is what has been missing from your feed, hit subscribe. This channel covers Irish news the way it deserves to be covered. No spin, no hysteria, just the full picture. Now, back to the numbers. The register, when it was described publicly, was going to work as follows. Every property listed for short-term lets, stays of up to 21 nights, would have to register annually with Fáilte Ireland. They would receive a unique registration number. That number would have to appear on every listing across every platform. Airbnb, Booking.com, all of them. Platforms that listed unregistered properties would face fines of up to 2% of their annual global turnover, which, for Airbnb, is not a small number. And Fáilte Ireland would share the registration data with planning authorities, meaning that for the first time, local councils would know exactly which properties were operating short-term, exactly which ones had planning permission, and exactly which ones did not. The register was not just a list. It was the first mechanism that would have made non-compliance visible. That is why it matters. That is why its absence matters. You cannot enforce rules you cannot see being broken. But all of that is still abstract. Here is what it actually means for the household that pays the bill. The average two-bedroom apartment in Ireland costs €2,086 per month to rent. That is the national average as of the final quarter of 2025. In Limerick, it is 2,127. In Galway, it is 2,113. In Cork, it is 2,013. Rents have risen in 13 of the past 14 years. They are now 80% above where they were a decade ago. The rental market in Ireland has a vacancy rate that, by available estimates, sits somewhere between 1 and 2% nationally. The historical average was 4 to 6. There are simply not enough properties, and the register was the only live policy instrument that was scheduled to add supply to that market in the near term. Not 5 years from now, not after the planning system is overhauled, in 18 days. For those watching from the UK or the US, this is what the housing market looks like in the Ireland you would come back to. Over €2,000 a month for a two-bedroom flat in the cities where most jobs are. A register that was supposed to free up 10,000 properties, delayed again. A planning rule that has been on the books for 7 years, unenforced. This is not a crisis that arrived suddenly. This is a leaking pipe nobody wanted to fix, and the leak has been running since 2019. The leaking pipe has a political dimension now too. Dublin Central and Galway West go to the polls on the 22nd of May. The register was due on the 20th. The seat in Dublin Central became vacant when Paschal Donoghue left for a post at the World Bank. 14 candidates are running, including Sinn Féin's Janice Boylan, in what is also party leader Mary Lou McDonald's own constituency. Sinn Féin has made housing the centrepiece of its by-election campaign. When a government misses a housing deadline 2 days before a housing-focused by-election in the constituency of the Sinn Féin leader, the political arithmetic is not subtle. Government parties have won just 4 of 34 by-elections since 1982. The history of Irish by-elections suggests they frequently become referendums on exactly the kind of specific, datable failure that a missed register deadline represents. The deeper problem, though, is not the election. Elections come and go. The deeper problem is structural. The leaking pipe is not leaking because one government forgot to fix it. It is leaking because the people who can most easily afford to let it leak, property owners operating short-term lets, rural tourism operators with political connections, backbench TDs who have constituents on both sides of the issue, have consistently been accommodated, while the people who cannot afford to wait, renters in their 30s paying over €2,000 a month, have consistently been told that the fix is almost ready. 2019. The first law requiring planning permission for short-term lets. 401 applications in 7 years. 2021. The Housing for All plan. The Register announced, the fix is coming. 2026. Three government sources. The legislation is not ready. The fix is not coming. Not this month. There are two things to watch in the days ahead. The first is whether any candidate in Dublin Central or Galway West makes the missed 20th of May deadline a central campaign argument before polls open on the 22nd. The second is whether the government announces a new date for the Register, and if it does, how that announcement is framed, and whether any of the numbers have changed. The public version of this story is that the Register was delayed for technical reasons and will be introduced in due course. That version is accurate. It is also incomplete. The mechanism that was supposed to make 32,000 properties visible to planning authorities and eventually return 10,000 of them to the long-term rental market does not exist. The date that was set for it to exist has passed in all but name, and the people waiting in the rental market at €2,000 a month did not get a letter telling them that. The leaking pipe is still leaking. The repair crew is still negotiating.